This is Soul Searching, your weekly radio program where you and I delve into all the important spiritual matters that matter. I'm Tom Budge, your host for the next hour. Today we take a special look at LGBTI issues in the Islamic faith. As is the case in so many other religions, Islam is not without its challenges when it comes to integrating gay, lesbian and transgender people into the religion. Stay with me as we take a look into what the Quran has to say about homosexuality, and we'll chat with Muhsin Hendricks, who is an openly gay imam and the executive director of the Inner Circle, an organization whose mission it is to bring healing to Muslims who are marginalized because of their sexual orientation and gender identity. Muhsin, thank you so much for being here with us on the show. Tell me a little bit about your background.
So I grew up in a very small town in Cape Town. At that time it used to be called Lansdowne. It's now called, it used to be called Sambokland, and now it's called Lansdowne. And the community that was around me was very Orthodox Muslim. Yeah. And my grandfather was the Imam of the mosque, and the mosque was like a stone's throw away from my house. And my mother was a teacher in the mosque, so I was very connected to the mosque from the time I was born. And so growing up in that very Orthodox environment and very soon coming to realize around the age of 5 that I'm very different from other boys, and then hearing, my grandfather preaching from the pulpit that, Mofis are going to go to hell and, all of these things. And it kind of, at the same time, also teaching that God is most compassionate, most merciful. In my childhood brain already, that was confusing for me because I didn't choose to be like this, but why would this compassionate and merciful God reject me? Indeed. So I grew up with that and not being able to talk to anybody about it because there are no safe spaces around these issues at that time when I grew up. So it was really, it was really only at the age of 18 that I decided that I wanted to study this religion more because I knew already at that time that it wasn't a choice for me to say, okay, this religion doesn't accept me, I'm out of here. It was very much part of my identity and part of my growing up. And so I wanted to make sense out of that.
So, Muhsin, you had rather a supportive mum, and you kind of knew that you had a faith that you needed to adhere to. You went to Karachi and you studied there from about 1996 onwards. Tell me about that.
Yeah, no, as I was growing up and going through my studies in Pakistan, that it was becoming a calling for me, that it was something that I needed to do. It was not just about myself. It's about, the injustice that are perpetrated in the name of Islam. And so constantly the conversations that I would have with my mother is, she would say, are you again in the papers now? Can't you just settle down with your boyfriend and then live a private life? If it was that easy, I would have done that, but it's not just about me.
So was Mum always so supportive?
She struggled with it quite a bit in the beginning, but I think I can remember the day when I told her, she actually collapsed. And so I knew that it wasn't an easy thing for her to deal with. But when she came out of that, the conversations we had was not around, she rejecting me as a son, but more, how do I answer to my community? Because she's also a woman of good standing in our Muslim community because she used to teach women and prepare them for the pilgrimage and stuff like that. So it's quite an honor to be in her position, and she was always worried about that. But I think slowly, as she was working through that, she said to me, you're my son and I will never throw you away, but can you just settle down and just tell her that it's not about me, it's about a calling that I have to contribute towards the injustices, to eradication of the injustices in our Muslim community. And yes, homosexuality is just one of them.
We're talking about LGBTI issues in the Islamic faith, and I'm having a chat with Muhsin Hendricks. He's the executive director of the Inner Circle. Islam is the second largest religion in the world, with a population of 1.6 billion Muslims. That's around 23% of the world's population. This population is spread through Latin America, North America, Europe, with a larger population being found in Africa, Middle East, and also in the Asia-Pacific region. The story in the Quran that sets the scene for dealing with homosexuality has to be the story of the people of Lot. There are 7 references in the Quran to the story, and it is a story of non-consensual sex between men. But it is not just the Quran that is read on its own. There are also the Hadith. These are the sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, and there are writers that go back as far as the 12th century that claim that Muhammad had cursed homosexuals, and several of these hadith had recommended the death penalty for both the active and passive partners in homosexual acts. So this means that there's not really a lot of clarity when it comes to dealing with homosexuality. There is the death penalty in many of the Muslim states like Afghanistan, Iran, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. It's absolutely illegal in Algeria, the Maldives, Malaysia, and Syria, yet it is completely legal in 20 other countries where there is a Muslim majority. A handful of countries are contemplating same-sex marriages, and these are Albania, Tunisia, Lebanon, and Turkey. Strangely enough, lesbianism is okay in Kuwait and Uzbekistan, but not male homosexuality. This has left many queer Muslims feeling alienated from their communities and rejected by God, friends, and their families. So Muhsin, with such diverse opinions spread across the Islamic world, with the Quran talking in conjunction with the Hadith about the death penalty, how does one actually reconcile all of this?
Yeah, I think the whole problem starts with the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and how it's being interpreted in the Quran as a blanket condemnation for homosexuality. And I think it's very important that as a scholar of the Quran, that we need to be very fair when we engage with the Quran. We can't be selective in saying that, these rules apply for other stories, but it doesn't apply for Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, my point of departure is always that if you want to make an interpretation of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, go through all those 9 verses that talks about the story. Look at because sometimes it's being repeated in different chapters. And why is it that it's being repeated? Because it's used as another example of social injustices, for example. And so paste all these stories together in the Quran and then you make an interpretation. The other thing that we also need to consider is that there's something that we call asbabun nuzul, the reason for revelation. At what point in the Prophet's journey and his mission did these verses come to him? And then the other thing we also have to realize about the Quran is that the Quran is written in poetic form. And so with poetry, there comes varied interpretations, and I think that's the beauty of the Quran. And the Quran reminds us constantly, that when you do make an interpretation, make the interpretation so that it becomes a healing and a mercy to people. Mm-hmm. And so how does a very harsh interpretation of that story where people have to be put to death becomes mercy and compassion, towards them. And then the last thing I want to say about Sodom and Gomorrah is that when you look at the whole story pieced together with the archaeological findings, with the way the story is being recorded in history and other traditions, including Christianity, then you cannot help but conclude that the issue is not about sexual orientation. In fact, the Quran is silent about sexual orientation. The story is about the abuse of sexual power. Mm. And so it boils down to how did this community use or misuse power and privilege. And sex became only one of the tools that they used to do that. So to make the story just about homosexuality is quite unfair. And we're not saying that homosexuality didn't exist in the time of Sodom and Gomorrah. Yes, it did. It's been there forever.
This is so fascinating.
But that's not the atrocity. That's not the condemnation. But it's about the abuse of sexual power. Because we also look at the story of Lot being asked to give up his daughters for temple prostitution. there's the injustice against women also, Again, sex is also being used as for power.
Are you saying that these texts are advising sexual continence rather than being texts that are about law and punishment?
Absolutely. It's how we conduct ourselves around the privilege of sex, for example. And I mean, that goes across the gender and sexuality spectrum. That goes for everybody in society.
So, Muhsin, it's never really easy for people to come to terms with their sexual differences in a world that can be quite bigoted at times. But what really worries me is that, it's one thing having to deal with family that reject you or don't understand you, but when your own religion doesn't understand you, that's rather difficult. And what advice do you have for young Muslims who are sort of coming to terms with their own sexuality?
That's double stigma and discrimination, right? So my advice would be is that the whole reason why we are sitting with this problem of homosexuality in the 21st century is because there has been a lack of research information in the last 1,000 years of Islamic history. I mean, when you ask classical scholars or Orthodox scholars around the issue of homosexuality, they quote consensus of scholars that have lived 1,000 years ago. I mean, we have moved on so much. New research has come out, scientific findings have come out around where we are in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity, and that needs to be brought into the interpretation. And so the information that's lacking, I mean, we have a lot of progressive scholars that have done some work on sexual orientation and gender identity. So find them and find, where's the information that is missing for you to be able to reconcile your faith with your sexual orientation and gender identity. And get in touch with the inner circle. I mean, we can put you in touch with the information.
I'd like to talk about the inner circle in depth in just a moment. Muhsin, I was quite alarmed to read that over 4% of Muslims believe that queer Muslims should be killed. Another statistic is that 9 out of 10 Muslims believe that homosexuality is a choice and that it is absolutely unacceptable for queer Muslims to express their sexual orientation, with half of queer Muslims being rejected by their family. Those are really horrible statistics. One thing I wanted to ask you, do you find that you come up against some robust debate from other scholars or maybe other imams inside Islam?
I think there's a love-hate relationship that some of the scholars have with me. I mean, if I can just quote one scholar, he was saying that, that Imam there in wine, but maybe we should just leave him alone because at least he's bringing gay people to become God conscious. But at the same time that they would not want to engage with me because they would much rather want to avoid the issue of homosexuality. And so I mean, we've been inviting religious leaders to participate in our programs. We've got a program called the Forum for Spiritual Leaders at our annual international retreat, and we constantly struggle to get Orthodox religious leaders to engage in that forum. So there's an avoidance of the issue. But I've never had, touch wood, I've never had any violent responses or, people wanting to.
That's a question I wanted to ask you.
It's just in 2007 when we came out with a documentary called A Jihad for Love. There was a sort of a fatwa passed by the Muslim Judicial Council to say that I'm out of the fold of Islam and people shouldn't watch this documentary because it's propaganda. But that's as far as it went. I've never heard from them again after.
Now, Muhsin, transgender issues, are they dealt differently in Islam from homosexuality?
Yeah, I think it's very important also that we make it the distinguish between transgender issues and homosexual issues, because and I think within the theology, within the Islamic jurisprudence, it's easier to deal with some of the transgender issues because it's spoken of because there's a physical evidence that and I'm saying this in inverted commas, that there's something wrong with them and that can be fixed. So, for example, if you look at Iran, they allow and even encourage and supported by the government, the surgery, to change your gender. But that might on surface level look like it's progressive, but it's actually not progressive because it's forcing transgender people to fit into the binaries of society, the gender binaries. And but then again, if you look at Sunni Islam, there's also an acceptance of transgender, specifically when they show physical signs of looking like a woman, for example, a man looking like a woman.
Yeah.
And then there's a particular place for that person to stand within the mosque. So, but when it comes to gay, I mean, it's like, you guys are making a choice, There's nothing wrong with you. You look okay, You can even have sex with a woman, but you just choose not to. And I think that's where we go wrong, because we don't understand sexual orientation completely.
In my research for this program, I came across one of the hadith that said, the Prophet cursed effeminate men, those men who are in the similitude, and those women who assume the manners of men, and he said, turn them out of your houses.
Yeah, when it comes to the question of hadith, we need to be very, very careful, because hadith that is used by imams, it's often not, they'll give you the text, but they don't give you the chain of narrators, for example. And also the classification of hadith. I mean, not all hadith is considered authentic. There are many, many hadiths that are considered weak and sometimes not acceptable. And there are also volumes of hadith that was written that was actually fabricated. Now, most of the hadiths, this is what I discovered in my research, that most of the hadith that are quoted against people that sort of commit sodomy, or dress up like women, and women dressing up like men, are by most scholars considered as fabricated hadith. But they are still being used.
To say that last part again, I didn't quite catch it.
What I was saying is that most of these hadith that are being used by Orthodox scholars in the mosque from the pulpit is considered as fabricated.
Oh, I see what you say.
Yeah.
Now, Muhsin, it was something like 2 years later when you'd returned from Karachi that you decided to form a group to help people who were going through the same kind of stuff as you were, and to pass your insights onto them. And I just love these kind of stories where things start to happen in a person's garage, but that's exactly how it kind of happened for you, wasn't it?
There's wonderful things that happens out of a
Isn't
gap.
it just, hey?
Yeah. Well, I think in the beginning when I wasn't really interested in meeting people to kind of save them or something like that. But I mean, I was at the height of my gayness also, and I thought I just wanted to meet with people that are similar to me. But when I actually sat down and engaged with these people, I was like, I'm fortunate to have figured this out for myself, that there's nothing wrong with me, but most of the gays and lesbians that I met at that time were suffering because they were not able to reconcile faith with sexual orientation and gender identity. For them, these were completely two, it was an oxymoron to use queer and Muslim in the same sentence, And it's out of that I felt the need to say to them constantly, but hey, have you looked at this? And hey, but this imam says something differently. And that's how I really started to have these weekly discussions with gays and lesbians in my area.
And from this emerged the Inner Circle, which has quite a nice international reputation too.
Absolutely. I mean, we started out as the Al-Fitra Foundation, and then I went up to Johannesburg after I was fired from one of the mosques. Went up to Johannesburg, met up with another group called the Gay Muslim Outreach, and together we formed the Inner Circle. And 6 years later, after I've done my research, I started to do my trainings more formally. And that's when I moved back to Cape Town to set up an office for the Inner Circle. A year later, it was an international organization.
Wow. So it provides what kind of service to Muslim men and women?
Well, there are multiple services. I think on a well, let's put it like this: it's basically two-pronged. One is to give support to queer Muslims, so we have training and counseling facilities to help Muslims to reconcile faith with sexual orientation and gender identity. And most often, we, at least for the last few years, we've had families also coming in for counseling, and we try to mend the relationship between family and the queer children. So that support is there. We also keep a small amount of money separately for queer Muslims who are ostracized from their family. Sometimes they are disowned and they've been being left on the streets, or they've been fired from a job or something like that. And so we keep that fund to support them. Then on a macro level, we have a lot of training programs for the Muslim community to help them to rethink, their stance on homosexuality and so on. So it's really trying to help the Muslim community to overcome their homophobia and the transphobia. And annually, we have the Training of Trainers program, whereby we bring between 6 and 8 activists from all over the world. We bring them down to Cape Town for a 3-month program, and then I train them in that 3 months how to deliver a workshop in their own context on Islam, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And then that culminates into the annual international retreat that normally happens in October, where we bring 120 activists together, and we talk about and strategize about how we can build this movement. And the theme of this movement is to realize an Islam that is compassion-centered and all-inclusive.
I can see why you said that this is a calling and also a lot of work, lifetimes worth of work. Muhsin, just another question that popped into my mind. Given the robust constitution that we have here in South Africa that protects gay rights, does this make any difference when it comes to negotiating between, say more conservative and more liberal views inside Islam?
I don't think. Well, I would say that the Constitution has been hugely. We're hugely grateful for the Constitution, because it's not possible for me to do this kind of work from any other country.
Wow, is that so? I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I think it's just been a blessing to have the Inner Circle starting out in Cape Town. And it's because of our Constitution. I mean, I can count up, I've probably since 2009 have done about 30 gay marriages. And it's because of the protection we have around our Constitution.
Gosh, it shows how biased even my thinking is, because I hadn't even contemplated that there were any gay marriages that had taken place in Islam. And you say that you'd facilitated some 30 of them.
But in terms of the Constitution helping Muslims to kind of rethink their stance on homosexuality, I think it didn't really change much, except for the fact that they are less violent towards gay people, because they can get in trouble for that. But they're still preaching from the pulpit that homosexuality is haram, it's forbidden. So within those Muslim communities, sentiments haven't changed much.
Muhsin, just as we wind up our show for today, what is your message then to Muslims who are in the LGBTI group of people and who face difficulty with their faith in Islam?
I just want to reiterate the point that it's really, really important for queer Muslims to get in touch with the structures that are supporting them. There's not just Orthodox Islam, there's also progressive Islam, and it's kind of growing by the day. And so get in touch with more progressive religious leaders and structures that can support you as a queer Muslim. I think that's really crucial. I mean, we also have a mosque at our office, so people who feel that they not feeling safe and and welcomed in mosques, there are alternative spaces in which they can pray. So they need to use that.
Do I understand it correctly that your presence is then only in Cape Town and not in the other provinces?
We are in the other provinces also, but only in terms of support groups, not really offices. Yeah. But if people get in touch with us and they are from outside of Cape Town, we will be able to connect them to those spaces.
Muhsin, I know how busy you are, and we're ever so grateful that you could spend this time with us. We've learned a lot from you. We wish you all of the best. And we'll put out some of the website details and your contact details at the Inner Circle. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
We've been talking to Muhsin Hendricks. He's a gay imam here in South Africa. He's also the executive director of the Inner Circle. You can find them on website address www.theinnercircle.org.za. There is also a switchboard number. It's a South African number, +27, and it is in Cape Town, 021 761 0037. If you wish to write an email to the Inner Circle, then please address it to communications@theinnercircle.org.za. I learned a lot from the show, and I hope you did too. My name is Tom Budge. I'll see you here on this station, Gay SA Radio, again next week at the same time. You'll find a podcast version of the show on the website www.gaysaradio.co.za. I'd love to hear from you. You can get hold of me at studio@gaysaradio.co.za and also via the station's various social media platforms. Let me leave you with a thought for the week. The most fundamental aggression to ourselves, the most fundamental harm we can do to ourselves, is to remain ignorant by not having the courage and the respect to look at ourselves honestly and gently. This is a message from Pema Kodran. She's a Buddhist nun. I'm Tom Budge. Until next time, goodbye.